Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. No guests this evening, so there'll be lots of time to interact with your comments. Do fire those in, and there's plenty to talk about. I was away last week, so I didn't do the live stream last week, so there's 2 weeks worth to talk about, and there's certainly lots been going on. We're definitely back into the routine now, so the live stream will be on every week until we take a break for Christmas, I would imagine, and we'll have different people coming on as well. But if you want to suggest topics for us to cover on the live stream as well, then do suggest those in the comments. Good evening, Kirsty. Welcome. So where do we start? Hello, Mrs. Scorpion there. Now, I was just looking at this book. Well, we'll have to get some input from that on the live stream very soon. I'll put it there to remind me to get in touch. So Christmas stuff in the shops already. Yeah, I suppose that's... I don't really go into shops very much these days. Do you? I find I just do so much online shopping. Christmas is about the only time I really go around shops looking for things. I don't so much mind Christmas things going in early. I used to find back to school things going in early when I was teaching. I wasn't too keen on that. I don't want to say anything back to school until, well, school's back, really. Yeah, there have been some reports, haven't there, about Christmas things being in really early. I mean, who buys Christmas things this early, apart from Neil, the Scottish Family Party's administrator, of course, who is a Christmas fanatic and probably buys, these Christmas shops that you see all year round, and you think whoever goes and buys things in those all year round. Well, Neil's the sort of person that does that. Right, where shall we start? Spoil for choice. Let's go to my. Let's go to the SNP conference. First of all, I released a video about that earlier on this evening, so I won't cover what's in the video. If you haven't watched that yet, I would do watch that. It's quite an eye-opener. But what's happened basically is a motion was put forward at the SNP conference to enshrine a right to abortion in the constitution of an independent Scotland. And the motion was passed, obviously. What you expect is the SNP. So what that means basically is in the event of an independent Scotland, which we know is not looking particularly likely happening at the moment anytime soon. But anyway, at the point where if that were to happen, assuming the SNP was the government, the SNP would write a constitution for the independent Scotland, and it would include in it a right to abortion. It doesn't say anything more specific than that, but a right to abortion. So what that would mean then, so you'd have an independent Scotland, that would be in the constitution. Then let's say 5 years later, the Scottish Family Party became the government and we wanted to change it. Well, that would be tough because you can't, it's in the constitution. You can't just say, oh, well, let's change the law in the parliament. It's not that simple because the constitution will also include provision for how to change the constitution. And sometimes there's things like you have to have a 2/3 majority in the parliament to change the constitution. And maybe there's a certain length of time it has to take as well. In other words, it makes it much, much more difficult than just it normally is to change a law or to repeal a law or introduce a new law. So it's a very serious step for the SNP to take. They're basically saying to their supporters, abortion and independence, these things are tied together. So if you're in the SNP and you're saying, I want independence, your version of independence includes a so-called right to abortion as far into the future as they've been able to ensure it. That is the SNP's vision for independence. Now, I mean, how anyone who's pro-life can be in the SNP in any case, I do not know. But surely this has got to be the last straw for anyone who's pro-life within the SNP. Because now even their most core uniting mission, Scottish independence, that now is tied up with being pro-abortion. So how that's going to play out, I do not know. I mean, John Mason's suspended at the moment from the SNP. Will this be the last straw for him? Or will it be one of the straws that breaks the camel's back? I mean, very possibly. Very possibly. The one person who opposed this motion at the conference, he basically said he was pro-life, but obviously he didn't argue on that basis because this is the SNP. He argued on the basis that this might result in less people voting for independence. And even that line just didn't cut through at all. There was overwhelming support for the motion. So I think it's quite a watershed moment for the SNP. I mean, what Kate Forbes makes of it, who knows? But that is the situation. So looks like we'll soon have a bill for abortion up to birth. Yeah, the Scottish government, thanks, John, the Scottish government is conducting a review of abortion law. And it's a bit behind schedule, I think, because the general election interrupted their plans. So it's behind schedule. But they are looking at time limits and all aspects of it, basically. And in which direction is it going to go? Well, it's only going to go in one direction, isn't it? I mean, Labour UK government are pretty likely to decriminalise as well. That's on the cards. And Scotland, I think, it's on the cards as well. They've been moving in that direction. So that's quite likely that will happen. Right, John again. Perhaps Christians will wake up to the reality of the SNP. Well, let's hope so. I mean, if those two things both happen before the next Scottish election, I mean, what more could you possibly need to make it clear? Because I think the SNP could do that, and Labour could well do it as well. Now, some people at that point, they might be thinking, oh, you see, the Conservatives were not quite as bad. But I think these changes, particularly time limit changes, I mean, from my point of view, okay, it makes things even worse, even more shocking. But ultimately, human life's a human life at every stage. So it's not really that fundamental a change for me. I think to a lot of members of the public, they'll be horrified by it. It'll be easier to make the pro-life case to the public over those issues. But as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the core thing is, all human lives are equally valuable at every stage of gestation. So taking away the time limit isn't that fundamental a step. Yeah, but the Conservatives, they would just continue abortion as it is. But as far as I'm concerned, is maybe not quite as bad, but it's still virtually as bad. They're basically in the same camp. The other conversation I've had with a few people recently as well, I used to talk about the Conservative delusion, where people try and fool themselves that, the Conservative Party are different, that they wouldn't do these various things. And often, I mean, they would. They might be a bit slower doing them, but they still do them. The new delusion I've come across is the reform delusion. People are trying to talk themselves into the belief that reform is somehow pro-life. Because Nigel Farage talked about the 10 Commandments or said his ancestors were Christian. I mean, just total, nonsense, nothing. No grounds at all to genuinely believe that Reform are a pro-life party, and they never will be either. Partly because of their membership. It would cut their membership in, well, not even in half. I'm sure most of their members would not be pro-life. But also, Reform are trying to get, 30% of the vote, 40% of the vote. They're trying to get MPs elected. So if they became pro-life, only about 10% of people are pro-life. So that would be a crazy strategy. So even if the likes of Nigel Farage really believed it, which they don't, they're not remotely interested in these sort of issues. Even if they were, it would be a disastrous strategy for them to follow. So yeah, that's the story there. Now I mentioned Kate Forbes's view. Didn't know that. I'll just play this clip just as a reminder to people. I think people need to see this from time to time. Here we go.
Position on abortion. I personally could never conceive of having an abortion. I've just come back from maternity leave. I've seen my baby at 12 weeks. I've seen my baby at 20 weeks. I couldn't conceive of having an abortion. But I have zero intention or interest in changing the law that allows for other people to have an abortion. I don't think that any woman goes for an abortion lightly. And those legal provisions exist. And certainly under any leadership that I have, I wouldn't be changing the law.
Yeah, so is Kate Forbes a pro-life politician? I'd say no, absolutely not. She is not. What she might think in her own mind, in her own thoughts, in her heart of hearts, that she doesn't really share publicly. Well, maybe I think she probably is pro-life. But does that make her a pro-life politician? No. She's not. She's a pro-abortion politician because of the reason you just heard. She says she will continue, the state killing of the unborn. That's what she would do. So she is a pro-abortion politician. Simple as that. So, yeah, very poetic. Very poetic. Yeah. Check out the birth certificate conspiracy. I'm not normally very convinced by conspiracies. That's not That's not Barack Obama, is it? Enlighten me about that one. I'm not sure. Yes, that's very good advice, and you will virtually never hear that. That's taboo to say that. That's one of the things where, yeah, it's just beyond the pale to suggest that, I think. Right, so where are we? So we're back at the SNP conference. Yes. So we went along on a little demonstration outside, spoke to some people. I talked about it in the video, you can watch that. And the quality of the debate in the debating hall in their conference was absolutely embarrassing. It made me think, I mean, sometime we've got our conference coming up at the 9th of November. I'll look forward to seeing you all there. It's a Saturday afternoon, just the afternoon, into the early evening as well for a social bit as well. Now, sometimes we think about the conference program and having some interaction from people there and discussion or whatever. But the SNP conference, they had people up on the stage giving a little talk, and I would think that just absolutely dreadful. If that was a family party conference, I'd be like wanting the ground to swallow me up. I'd be so embarrassed that was what was being presented to people. And yet the SNP seems to be quite happy for this to go on. So the debate was pretty embarrassing. You might have seen this clip. I put it on social media, but it's quite funny. So I will play it again. This is a lady arguing for this motion to enshrine the right to abortion in the Constitution. So here we go.
We do not want to be under the regime of people like the family party, the Kinderküche kitchen people. Yep.
Every time I watch that, I smile. When I first saw that, I thought she was trying to say Ku Klux Klan. I thought that's what she was trying to get out, and it wouldn't quite happen, which would have been the most ridiculous thing to have possibly said. But I did think that was what she was trying to say. I then realized she wasn't trying to say that. She was trying to say the German for children, kitchen, and church, which apparently was a little phrase, a little slogan that the Nazis used, but they didn't invent it. It was around in Germany before then. And the idea was it sort of encapsulated that the ideal womanly activities or whatever. So she's trying to suggest that we're in some way wanting to pressurize women into doing certain things, which is absolutely untrue. I mean, what we're trying to do is balance things up, because we've got a society, a government policy, Conservative and SNP, and same with Labour, it's going to be as well, that's designed to pressurize families to have both parents working. That is the mission of the government in Scotland and England. Whereas we say, let's try and give parents choice. If a parent wants to be at home full time with the kids, let's try and make that a viable option for them. So we're not trying to tell anyone what they ought to do. We're trying to help people to do what they want to do. And in many cases, that is what women want to do. People on the left of politics tend not to like that. They want women and men to do the same things. Even though the women say that, they often don't choose to do typically male occupations. All right, they're the words she was trying to get out. So, yeah, that was. So we have one more thing from the SNP conference. Actually, you might have seen this bit as well. This was a different debate. I mean, I finished with the enshrining abortion in the Constitution bit. Now, this was one about transgender healthcare. Just listen to this.
Throughout my entire life, I have been treated as an equal by our movement, a citizen of the egalitarian Scotland to come. I am no different from any other working class person from Clackmannanshire, no different from Vilma that runs the grocers or Connie that serves drinks in the Wetherspoons.
I mean, that's a strange thing to try and assert, isn't it? I mean, that is an attempt to convince yourself of something that you know isn't true, isn't it? But anyway, let's let him carry on.
But there are those in our society who don't see it that way. There are those who are looking for a scapegoat in the culture wars, that destructive modern phenomenon that appeals to the lowest common denominator.
Culture wars. It's interesting. I think in Scotland in particular, the SNP, the Greens as well, they love to talk about culture war. The idea that there's this culture war that's the other side's fault. We're just trying to get on with, being normal people and concentrating on other issues. But these culture war people keep trying to cause conflict and tension and disagreement over these issues. I mean, it's a really bizarre point of view. I mean, who's pushed these issues? Who's brought these issues out of nowhere and made them into major controversies? I mean, it's the progressive side. It's parties like the SNP, like the Greens, like Labour, and for a significant part of the last 14 years, like the Conservatives as well. And media, celebrities, etc. They've all been pushing this. And then when people disagree with it, they call it culture war. And the implication is, I say, it's the other side are being unreasonable and causing a problem. They've been a bit nasty. Can we not just all live in peace and harmony rather than disagreeing about these things? I mean, it's a really bizarre line. But in Scotland in particular, they seem quite obsessed by it. So in other words, this man here, his line basically is all that he stands for or wants to be, wants to do, all that he's demanding of the government. He's just, the mainstream. It's people who are saying, well, hang on a minute, I'm not sure this is a good idea. They're the ones who are coming along, creating problems out of nothing by trying to start a culture war. Anyway, let's hear a bit more.
In our society. The truth is that by quirk of birth and little else, I so happen to be transgender. Due to that quirk of birth, I've lost a job that I've loved, been laughed out of interviews, and have been denied housing.
A quirk of birth. Again, it's sort of not true. But you can see this person. If you were, let's say you're on the train and this person came and sat near to you, you heard them talking, how would you feel? Parts of you, how would I feel? I'd feel slightly uncomfortable because it's quite odd. And if I was with someone else, if someone was talking in this manner, I would worry that if the person I was with just sort of made a joke about it or sort of caught my eye, I would worry we'd be tempted to smirk or laugh or whatever, because there's a sense in which he's looking sort of a bit ridiculous, sounds a bit ridiculous, and it's sort of inevitable. People's reaction, even people trying their very best to be sensitive or whatever, their reaction, their facial expression is going to it's going to let out what they really think, that they're actually thinking either this is a bit odd or they're a bit uncomfortable, they might even find it a bit amusing or whatever. So you can imagine, I mean, this person's life out in public must be pretty difficult. It must be quite unpleasant going around knowing that probably that's what people are thinking. Occasionally you'll just get an indication where someone's views sort of leak out in one way or another. So it must be a pretty uncomfortable, miserable experience, frankly, being out and about, trying to pretend to be something that you're not, and hoping that people either don't notice or go along with your delusion or whatever. I mean, you can imagine, but it's not the formula for a happy life. It's a happy daily life. And that's what it sounds like, doesn't it?
Though by far, the most egregious form of discrimination that I have faced has been at the hands of our National Health Service. I had formalised a shared care agreement with my GP. I had paid over £500 for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria due to having no reasonable hope of ever being seen by an NHS gender identity clinic due to the absolutely inhumane waiting times.
I mean, that's the one waiting list in the NHS that really should be as long as possible. I mean, like, infinitely long would probably be ideal, from my point of view. Anyway, let's carry on.
Following 3 months of treatment, hormone replacement therapy and blood testing, I was suddenly dropped from care, cold turkey. No concern was given for my health and not a word of sympathy uttered.
Hang on, health, is this a health issue? Because it gets a bit confusing, doesn't it? Because you were saying that this is just some accident of birth. Now this is a health issue, but I think sometimes when people say they think transgenderism is a mental health issue, people get really angry with that. And yet the man here is saying it is a health issue and you need the NHS to help him. They were neglecting his health. Doesn't really make sense, does it? But anyway, let's carry on.
I tried every legitimate avenue that I could for the care that I am entitled to as a taxpayer, to no avail. I was told later that the sole director of this practice had made this decision based on an article that they had read, grounded in the culture war over facts, reason and compassion. This is utterly unsustainable and unacceptably cruel. There is no fixing it while the most basic of gender-affirming care is locked behind this outdated diagnosis. GICs, some of which do not even have a full-time psychiatrist capable of providing this diagnosis, will never be able to provide timely care. Conference, please pass this resolution so that I and other trans Scots like me will no longer have to be treated as second-class citizens, despite my devotion to our movement, our society, our party and our country.
Now, again, would you fancy trying to have a chat to this person about this issue? Could you imagine sitting down with a cup of tea and trying to talk it through in a reasonable way? I find that quite difficult to imagine. I think this is someone who's very hurt, very angry, and they're blaming their problems on the system, even though actually the core of the problem is they're trying to live their life on the basis of something that's not true. They've been deceived by an ideology that's been presented to them from all sorts of directions, including from the government and through the media. And it's not working out well. So they're assuming it should work out really well if they get the proper care that they need. So the blame goes on to the NHS. Now, when I said about like sitting down having a conversation, it's quite hard to imagine. Also at the conference, just as we were leaving on Sunday morning, some sort of pro-Palestine protesters came, and they were really unpleasant as well. A big loud megaphone, just chanting the same things again and again and again. And again, just the general attitude and tone and presentation from them was angry and aggressive. You know, there wasn't going to be any discussion. There was going to be no like chat on the fringe of that protest. And it's the same sort of mindset here as well. And yeah, I think it's not a healthy state to get into. I think where all you can do is to be like hammering and shouting and whatever like this. Anyway, Ailey's not quite finished here.
Thank you very much, Ailey.
Conference. Scotland is a song, and like any song, it must be sung together.
Thank you, Ailey.
How about that then? Now, I'll let it play a little bit into the applause, because you can hear that's pretty enthusiastic applause there. That is the SNP. That is the culture of the SNP. I mean, there probably were, watching people going in, the attendees at the SNP conference were quite a mature selection of people. I would say a good 70 or 80% look like pensioners, let's put it that way. Certainly people in there well into their 60s or 70s or 80s, that seemed to be the majority of the audience. And yet there was the audience response to something like that with rapturous applause. And then maybe it's certain elements within the audience make most noise. Maybe it's that happens. But yeah, it's quite bizarre. Again, I think it comes back to the independence thing. They think that the most important thing is independence. So we've got to unite to get independence. So if you have to put up with some things that you think are a bit crazy and weird and wrong and whatever, embarrassing, if the leadership think it helps towards independence, then you've just got to go along with it and sit there clapping. That's the only explanation I can think of. But yeah, I mean that's the personal response, isn't it? When you see someone like that, is that a happy person? That a person whose life's on a positive trajectory? I mean, even if the NHS does everything that they want, are things just going to suddenly become good for that person? Are they going to become positive? It's hard to imagine, isn't it? It's yeah, it's sad. Okay, right. Where should we go to next? Let's have a look through a few slides here. There's been a lot on the pro-life front in the news recently. Now, Trump is an interesting character. Now, Trump was making very clear pro-life statements a few years ago, which I applauded. I was never sure if he really believed it. I think maybe it was a sort of tactical move at the time. But still, it's what people do. That's the important thing. So if someone says they're going to do something, then that counts in their favor. If they don't actually do it, then, or if you're worried they're not going to actually do it, then obviously you've got to take that into account. But he was sounding very pro-life. But then recently, he's sort of gone a bit mushy and contradictory and a bit all over the place with it, which is a shame. But it's interesting to see what's happened in America with that. He said he would vote against a 6-week time limit for abortion in Florida. He said he would vote against it. And immediately, the pro-life movement in America, a lot of Christian organizations, they absolutely leapt on him and said, right, this is a disgrace, stuff you then, we're not supporting you if you're like this, that's completely wrong. We're finished with you if that's what you're going to say. Really strong response. So Trump sort of backtracked and went back to a more pro-life position. And I thought, what a contrast to the way it is in Scotland. Because in Scotland, I mean, the equivalent to that would be like what Kate Forbes said there, that she wants to maintain legal access to abortion. I mean, what would have happened if there'd been a huge outcry from churches and Christian organizations saying, whoa, Kate, you've totally led us down there. That's completely wrong. What are you doing saying that? But would that happen in Scotland? Unthinkable. Nothing remotely like it. So Trump fears the pro-life movement in America. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean he worries they're going to put a bomb under his car or something. But he fears them in that they will withdraw their support if he doesn't take the line they want him to take. Now, that's not some sort of bullying or sinister tactic. That's democracy. That's how democracy is supposed to work. So the pro-life movement in America knows that, operates on that principle, and basically pushes Trump around and pressurizes him into towing the line with them, which is the way democracy is supposed to work, and it's in a good cause, so that's great. In Scotland, in the UK, totally the opposite. Politicians know you can just say completely opposite of the pro-life movement or Christian teaching or whatever, and basically nothing will happen. People will still support you, and it will be basically overlooked. Right. Okay, let's... Right, this is an interesting one, rumbling away in the background in the Scottish Parliament. This is about restraint and seclusion in schools, particularly in special schools, schools for pupils with behavioral problems. Now, if you speak to a teacher in a mainstream school, primary or particular high school, they'll tell you that there's some pretty severe problems probably in that school in terms of behavior. So imagine what it's like in special schools for children with particular behavior problems. I mean, it really is pretty wild and literally physically dangerous, very stressful and very unpleasant in some cases, place to work. And in some cases where you've got a kid who won't do as they're told, or they're smashing the place up, or they're attacking someone, whatever. And what would happen in the past is there would be a mechanism, a system where a couple of people would come along, grab that person, escort them to their room, put them in, and close the door. Maybe that would be up there. They've got to stay there until the next mealtime or whatever. So they're sort of in isolation there. I mean, similarly, like what happens in primary schools now, where you get a 5-year-old smashes the classroom up, turns over all the bookcases, etc., and the teachers just stand and watch. Whereas in times gone by, a couple of blokes would have gone and grabbed that 5-year-old, picked them up, carried them, so they'd have stopped them from doing it. They would physically have intervened to stop that happening, which I think is actually quite positive, because then the person doing it is humiliated in front of the other children, instead of the person who's doing it feeling emboldened and feeling like they've got away with it in front of the other children. And the adults are humiliated because they have to stand by and watch. But obviously, in the current climate, children's rights, etc., the direction of travel has always got to be away from adults exercising authority or power or control over children. So there's very much a push in that direction. Now, seclusion, that could be, so you get a kid who's been troublesome, just sit in that room for a while, sit there on your own. There's a book to read, get a drink there if you need it, but you're going to stay in there for the next hour. That's what they might call seclusion. And say restraint as well. You can imagine the situation where a pupil attacking a teacher, attacking another pupil. I mean, there's not restraint is obviously the best thing to do there. Now, these developments, they're not saying that you can never restrain a child, but it's heading towards creating the situation where no one will dare do it. It'll be a bit like the police marksman who, I've probably told this story before, a police marksman who retired, and he then confessed that he decided decades ago he was never actually going to shoot someone. If ever he was told to shoot someone, or if he had an opportunity, he decided he was going to deliberately miss, because he knew once you shoot someone, your life's over. You spend the next 6 years in inquiries and this, that, and the other, and it just wrecks your life. So that's the situation we're heading towards, where adults in these schools will know that if they do restrain someone, then it's just going to be a nightmare. They're probably going to be blamed for it. They probably did it wrong. There'll probably be a complaint against them, maybe even legal action against them. It could really damage their career. So better let the kids knock the living daylights out of another kid or destroy the classroom or whatever. Better that to happen rather than your professional life become a nightmare for the next 2 years, which is sort of understandable. So that's the direction of travel we're in. And the BBC are obviously helping this along. With something like restraint, I mean, if you're a kid in a school and you're misbehaving and you get restrained, how do you feel about that? What's the chance of you saying, well, actually, that was necessary. So, yeah, they actually did the right thing. I was totally out of control. So they needed to pin me down because I was doing a lot of damage. What's the chance any child's ever going to say that? Very, very unlikely. But if you invite them to complain, is there anything you'd like to complain about your teachers? Oh, yes, he pushed me a bit too hard. When he grabbed my arm, it hurt. And that's the sort of story that they'll want to go with. Now, with restraint, now, if you imagine that, if you're trying to restrain, let's say, a teenager who's kicking and screaming, let's say you've got a couple of strong blokes trying to do that, still, that's a bit of an unpredictable situation. And it might not go entirely to plan, and the kid might end up getting hurt one way or another, or falling over, or whatever. So there will always be stories where this hasn't quite gone to plan, and these will be picked up on. There might also be stories as well where teachers go over the top, and they do act in a way that, when it's looked at, there's people were quite rightly saying that was out of order. You shouldn't have done that. But the direction of travel is to make it harder and harder for staff in schools to use any sort of physical force with children. And I think, yeah, it's just another step away from discipline and authority in schools, in particular, special schools. Someone I know worked in a special school where the behavior of the very small number of pupils was beyond appalling. The most vile abuse towards staff, particularly female staff, physical attacks on staff, let alone on the other kids. And whatever a pupil did, whatever they threw at you or spat at you or swore at you, whatever they did, the response always had to be the same. You had to say, how can we support you better? I mean, I couldn't possibly do that, because that's not education. That is miseducation. That's not teaching people the way the world works. It's not teaching people about justice and responsibility. It's just indulgence. And that's the direction it's heading. I say that article's from the BBC. So the BBC will be helping it along in that direction. All the children's charities will be behind it as well. I suppose this is the next thing after the smacking ban. And remember, it includes sending a kid to be on their own. Now, it used to be, parents would send the kid to the naughty step. Well, now they might be saying, well, that's a form of seclusion. So that's inhumane, children's rights and all that stuff. So you shouldn't be doing that. So whatever means are left for adults to punish or just exert authority or control over children, they're being chipped away at one by one. And this is the latest thing. So, yeah, right. Conference. So do get your conference tickets. It's on social media already. I think it might be £12, absolute bargain. It's just the afternoon. And then included in the price, there's a drinks reception with some nibbles and things as well afterwards. So do join us. We've got some external speakers as well. So we've got some family party regulars and a couple of people coming from England, actually. I'm not sure I can announce those yet. I'm not sure absolutely at the stage where I can announce them. But at least one person you might well have heard of, in any case, is coming along to speak. So it'd be good to see you there. Right, Ash Reagan, the Alba Party's last remaining representative, because I mean, they lost all the councillors at the council elections. They lost all their MPs. Well, both their MPs at the Westminster election. They'll lose their MSP at the next Scottish election, I assume. I don't think they're going to get anyone in on the list. So Ash Reagan's still there as an Alba MSP, and she's brought forward a bill again to criminalise the buying of sex. Now, this is a really interesting issue. They've been talking about this in the Scottish Parliament for how long? Probably about 7 or 8 years. And I think it's really weird why they haven't just gone ahead and done it. Because it's the sort of law it's right up their street. It's the sort of thing the SNP and the Greens and, well, basically all the parties more or less. Well, yeah, I think the Conservatives as well will probably be behind it. So I do not understand what hasn't happened. Because it's based on feminist theory. I mean, normally that's enough for anything to get through the Scottish Parliament. Now, I heard an explanation once of why this law hadn't been progressed through the Parliament. And I'll tell you what it is. And the theory was that there are a substantial number of brothels, etc., in Scotland who had evidence of prominent public figures, politicians, etc., being their clients. And if there are moves taken to criminalize buying sex, whatever, then they would reveal these names. They would reveal the names of their clients. Now, do I believe that? When I first heard it, I thought it was possibly there was some credibility in it. I would say I don't believe it now because let's say when I heard it, there was a certain gentleman as First Minister. And you might think, well, that's not impossible. That could be true. But then you go on to Nicola Sturgeon, then you go on to... So I think that theory becomes less credible the longer it goes on. So I don't accept that that's the case now, that people are scared because things might be revealed. So why is it taking so long? I don't know. But what the law does, says it's all from feminist principles. I'll read you a couple of things from it. So prostitution is a system of violence. Right, wrong. You shouldn't describe prostitution as violence. It just is not. However unpleasant, distasteful, immoral, or whatever it is, it's not violence. But the word violence means whatever people want it to mean these days. So system of violence that reduces women to commodities. Okay, reducing to commodities, correct. But women, hang on, why women? There's male prostitutes as well. Okay, a small minority, but they exist. So do we not care about the male prostitutes? Again, it's just the feminist angle. It's got to be seen as a battle of the sexes issue. You know, men are bad, women are good. And we've got to squeeze the issue into that mold, and then we're happy because it's reinforcing our worldview. And it affects women's ability to achieve equality. Well, again, what about male prostitutes? How does that work at all? Right, let's look at a bit more about it. Now, it's interesting because they say, the harm reduction approach doesn't work with prostitution. Normally, with the Scottish government, the harm reduction approach is their favourite thing. So if you look at drugs, for example, let's not even try and stop people taking drugs. Let's decriminalise them. Let's destigmatise them. But then what we're going to do is we're going to try and help them to use clean needles. So we'll reduce the harm and it sort of won't be too bad and that'll be fine. Harm reduction, that's the best we can do. Now, you would think they might take the same approach to prostitution, but they don't because of the feminist angle. So they say this is inherently harmful to women in prostitution, by which they mean the prostitutes. And I would agree, it is inherently harmful. It's also inherently harmful to the men involved in prostitution as well. Now, I mean male prostitutes. I think prostitution is also inherently harmful to the customers as well. The people who buy sex are also harming themselves psychologically and relationally and spiritually, however else you want to put it. So everyone involved is harmed in one way or another. But the way they try and treat it, as I say, it's got to squeeze into the women are the victims, men are the bad people, which probably, broadly speaking, that's generally the situation, but not in all cases. So to make these blanket statements is just wrong. But Again, if you're a dogmatic feminist, it seems like you're allowed to say things that are not true. So they want to criminalize the buying of sex because basically on their theory, the prostitutes are the women, the customers are the men. So we want to criminalize the men because, you know, men are the bad people. What they will not accept is there are some women who enter into prostitution of their own volition because it's a good way of making money. You'll have heard these stories where you get, you know, a student at university finances their course through, you know, the sugar daddy or whatever, or some other form of prostitution. So some prostitutes decide that that's what they want to do because there's a lot of money in it, a lot of money to be made. Now, even if that's a tiny minority of prostitutes, I think it is probably a minority. I don't know. I'm not sure there's accurate figures available for that. Even if it's quite a small minority, it still means this attitude that all prostitutes are victims and all customers are like abusers. It's just not right. It's not true. So to base a law on that is unfair. So you could have a girl deciding, I'm going to be a prostitute and I'm going to dress up seductively and I'm going to try and seduce a man, lure him in, and then see if he'll pay for sex. And so they'll find a bloke, and you know, seduce him, lure him in, and he ends up paying for sex. Right? Who's the victim there? Is it really a case that that man's abused that woman? There's an equally good case that the woman's abused and exploited the man, I would say. And another way to look at it is prostitutes like build up some sort of relationship with their clients and then exploit it as a form of emotional exploitation. So yeah, it's a much more complicated picture. So what the family party policy is with prostitution, it should be criminalized, but criminalize both aspects. Buying and selling sex should be illegal. But for women who are prostitutes, for many of them, they want to escape it. So in that case, they give them support. And as long as they're taking steps down a path away from prostitution and engaging with that process, then there needn't be any legal consequences for them. But if they're not going down that path and they're repeating in the crime, then it should be treated as a crime. So we'll see if that bill progresses. I think it's a mystery to me why it hasn't already happened in the Scottish Parliament. So we'll see if they manage to get that through before the next election. We shall see. Right, just before we go to that, let's how long we've got? Let's leave that for now. Let's just have a look at Murdo Fraser. Now, there's a Scottish Conservative leadership campaign going on, of course, alongside the UK one. The UK one has got a longer timetable. So we'll have a Scottish Conservative leader before we've got a UK one. I think Megan Gallagher, it seems like people are saying, is probably not a serious contender. So the two contenders seem to be more Russell Finlay and Murdo Fraser. Now, it's interesting hearing people commentating on it. I mean, some people have clearly really got it in for Murdo Fraser. And Stephen Daisley, who writes in the Spectator and the Daily Mail sometimes, I don't know what Murdo Fraser has done to upset him, but he's just writing hit piece after hit piece, just trying to knock Murdo Fraser's campaign. And I read the things and I think, this is just personal animosity. There's not really any content here. So I don't know what's going on there. But Murdo Fraser has been, campaigning. I mean, generally, I would say I rate Murdo Fraser. I would say maybe he is their best performer in the Parliament. I think he's very articulate, and I think he presents quite strongly in many cases. Murdo Fraser is a Christian. I've met him a couple of times. I don't know him, but I've met him a couple of times and taken part in events with him. He's involved with running the prayer breakfast. He'll appear at events about Christians in politics, etc., giving people the benefit of his wisdom. Right, this video I'm going to show here, the sound on the question is really poor. So maybe turn your volume up to see if you can hear it. And then the answer will blast out because he's got a microphone. So here we go.
Question to real world issues.
Okay.
Since you were elected to Holyrood, you voted against the Parliament and the power on civil partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
You voted against same-sex adoption. You voted against gay marriage. How can you justify having such an anti-gay voting record? And on abortion, pro-life or pro-choice?
So on abortion, I've always believed in a legal right to abortion, so let me just put that on the record. I'm a Christian. I take a particular view on what marriage should be. That's how I voted, and I haven't changed my mind on that. But the Conservative Party should be a broad church, and I'm delighted to have Jamie here. Jamie and I have a different view on these matters. Jamie's the convener of the LGBT group in the Scottish Parliament, and we can disagree about these issues, but we're part of the same team. I don't know, Jamie, if you want to add something to that.
You're very welcome to come to my wedding.
I'll be delighted.
You can do the after dinner speech perhaps. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, the questions, if you didn't hear them, the questions, it was from the Daily Record person. It basically said, you voted against civil partnership, you voted against gay adoption, you voted against gay marriage. So you're obviously anti-gay. And also he said, are you pro-life or pro-choice? So that was the question, basically. Murdo Fraser dealt with the pro-life or pro-choice one, first of all, in a very dismissive and summarily, let's put it that way. And so basically, defends the legal right to abortion. Now, in saying that, he would be being consistent if he said, well, actually, personally, I think it's wrong, but it should be legal. So that would be a consistent, well, he wouldn't be lying, let's put it that way. You can hold those 2 points of view without being dishonest. But can you hold them consistently? I really don't think that you can. So Murdo Fraser is basically the same as Kate Forbes. So is Murdo Fraser a pro-life politician? No. Murdo Fraser is a pro-abortion politician. Murdo Fraser wants to continue, wants the mass slaughter of the unborn to continue in Scotland. He wants it to remain legal. He wants the NHS to maintain that service and for the killing to continue. Now, he might say, well, I don't actually want it to continue, but I'm going to allow it to continue. Well, I think that's splitting hairs, really. So Murdo Fraser, pro-abortion politician. Kate Forbes, pro-abortion politician. John Mason is the only pro-life politician in the Scottish Parliament. And which party is he in? Well, none. He's not in a party at the moment. He's an independent MSP because he's suspended from the SNP. So Murdo Fraser, I'm extremely disappointed about that. Now, I would be pretty confident he is actually pro-life. Again, like Kate Forbes, in his heart of hearts, in his secret thoughts, is pro-life. But he's willing to say that just to try and get the job or advance his career or whatever. Now, he might try and justify himself by saying, oh, you have to pick your battles. There's no point fighting this one now because we've got no chance. Public opinion's not behind you, whatever. That's just not good enough. You cannot endorse the continuation of such a grave evil in good conscience. That's the sort of thing, that sort of sacrifice you cannot make no matter what your goal are. The ends do not justify the means to have to say something like that. Now, Murdo Fraser is quite involved in, for example, organising the prayer breakfast, the big thing where lots of MSPs go along. And I find it very frustrating that there's no challenge to these MSPs on these key moral issues. And then you hear Murdo Fraser speaking and you think, well, that sort of explains why. Because he's a pro-abortion politician. Now, Murdo Fraser goes straight on there from saying, I'm pro-abortion, basically, and I'm a Christian. Now, that really makes it stark to me, because when he says the I'm a Christian bit, now, in terms of his personal spiritual life, I think that's extremely important. And I'm delighted he's a Christian. I'm not suggesting that I doubt that. But as far as politics is concerned, I couldn't care less. So when people say, oh, we need more Christians in the parliament, I say, absolutely wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Christians who want to continue the killing of the unborn, more Murdo Frasers, more Kate Forbes, is that what we need? More people promoting the killing of the unborn? No. So Murdo Fraser says as a Christian, that means, as far as politics is concerned, that means nothing whatsoever to me. I couldn't care less. What I care about is whether or not he would challenge evils and promote goodness in the parliament. And on the crucial issue of our day, which I think is the life issue, then he's failed in that way. So whether a Christian or not interested. He's a pro-abortion politician. So politically, he's an enemy. He's on the other side. He is an opponent of me and of the family party because we want to defend the unborn. He doesn't. So that's the chasm. Christian or not Christian, don't care about that. Defend the unborn, let the unborn die. I do care about that. And I hope lots of other people can understand that. Right, let's go on to his other thing then. Same-sex marriage. What he was saying is basically perfectly mirroring Kate Forbes. I'm wondering if he's thought to himself, if Kate Forbes has said something, then it's probably safe. People can't be too shocked. I mean, this is the Conservatives after all. So if I just say the same as her, that can't be too bad, can it? But what he's saying is virtually the same as Kate Forbes said. So for same-sex marriage, he's saying, you know, he voted against it. He does it, and he still doesn't agree with it. But then Jamie Green says, you know, will you come to my wedding? And Jamie Green is gay, so a same-sex marriage. Will you come to a same-sex wedding and give the speech? And Murdo Fraser says yes. I think, hang on, I don't understand this. Now, what Murdo Fraser is doing here, just like Kate Forbes does, is that he's saying basically, I'm against same-sex marriage. It's just because I'm a Christian. And, you know, Christians, we're just a bit weird and we've got these funny beliefs. And this is one of our funny beliefs, that we're sort of not into that sort of thing. We don't agree with that sort of thing. So it's a bit like, you know, say a Jew saying, pork, I don't eat pork. It's just a religious thing. I don't eat pork. Or some other ritual thing, you know, we don't work on the Sabbath or something like that. It's that sort of thing. But within Christian teaching, same-sex marriage isn't that sort of thing. It isn't just some arbitrary marker of being part of the faith or whatever, part of a community. It isn't that. The Christians, Orthodox Christian teaching behind it is that same-sex sexual relationships are immoral. They're wrong. It's something that people ought not to do. So the concept of honoring that sort of relationship and officially recognizing it and celebrating it is obviously sort of doubly wrong. So a Christian, you know, should not in good conscience be able to condone that. So if Murdo Fraser says that he would join in with Jamie Green's gay wedding, I mean, so in a gay wedding, what the people are affected from a Christian point of view, Orthodox Christian point of view, what the people are saying is that we are promising to each other that we are going to continue in this relationship and this activity that is wrong. That from God's perspective is wrong. It's immoral, but we're promising to continue in it forever. Right? How can Murdo Fraser sort of make light of it and say, yeah, I'll come along and give a speech for that? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. But I think we've got here is Murdo Fraser saying what he thinks he needs to try and smooth over and not get into too much trouble with the Daily Record reporter. I think that's what's happening. Because that sort of response doesn't make sense from a Christian perspective. And the other thing was asked about was gay parenting as well, because he voted against gay adoption. And at the time he said, you know, some people think that children need a mother and a father figure, ideally, which is exactly what I say as well. Now, Murdo Fraser now says, you know, he's moved beyond those beliefs. He doesn't really think that anymore. I would love to ask him, has the evidence changed? You know, what evidence were you basing your view on, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? And what new evidence has caused you to change your mind? And I know what the answer would be, if he was honest. The answer would be, it's nothing to do with any evidence. It's just that 15 or 20 years ago, he said that because it was acceptable to say, and it's what he genuinely believed. Whereas now, he still genuinely believes it, but he daren't say it. He thinks it would be too risky to say it. There'd be a lurid front cover on the Daily Record. So he's got to weigh up what's more important, stating and standing up for what's best for children, or keeping yourself off the Daily Record's front page with a hostile headline. And obviously, he's chosen keep yourself off the Daily Record front page. So I'm not impressed with that. But the central issue, I say, is Murdo Fraser now pro-life politician. So the one pro-abortion politician, the one pro-life politician is suspended by his party. The SNP had another pro-life MP, Lisa Cameron, and she was hounded out of the SNP, basically. So for the people whose narrative is, let's get involved in the main parties and influence from the inside, and we can really make a change that way, it's not going particularly well at the moment. I would have to say it is not going well at all. And then for Murdo Fraser with the same-sex marriage thing, but that's his approach. My approach with the family party, our approach, is to put forward genuinely what we believe and argue for them. So rather than saying, oh, yeah, we don't like same-sex marriage, but that's just us. We might have some funny religious beliefs, so just leave us alone and don't discriminate against us. That's not what we say at all. We say, no, let's leave the religious beliefs aside. Is this a good thing to promote in society? Is this a good thing for the government to recognize? And for several reasons, it's not. Mainly because, as Murdo Fraser probably still believes, children need a mum and a dad, ideally. So the ideal structure, the ideal building block of a healthy society is mum and dad, fall in love, get married, commit to each other for their whole life, then have children who are brought up within that stable relationship with their natural mother and father. That's an ideal that we want replicated on the greatest possible scale in society. So as a family party, we can explain that. We can make sense. We don't have to say, oh, sorry, we're just like funny religious people, so we've got some odd views, but, don't hold it against us, will you? And then that's a really unfortunate thing. Because if you believe, as I do, that what we're dealing with here is like God's standards and God's wisdom, to be sort of embarrassed by them and apologetic for them, and to fail to put forward the case, the practical evidence-based case for them, I think is very, very unfortunate. So, right, so Mr. Mellon or Mrs. Mellon, pretty much like all politicians, Murdo Fraser will say what he thinks people want to hear. Yeah, I would tend to agree. It's the same with Kate Forbes. There were some things sort of would be difficult to get out of. I mean, same-sex marriage, he could have said he'd changed his mind. But I think if Kate Forbes hadn't have said she would have voted against same-sex marriage, maybe Murdo Fraser would have changed his mind about it. So I just feel this is a big week in terms of, let's get involved in the other parties, the main parties. Look at, you've got the SNP, abortion's now in there, they want that in the Constitution. So that is tied up in their vision of independence. So, the pro-life influence in the SNP, right? They've just had a poke in the eye, to say the least. Then you've got Murdo Fraser as well, coming out as pro-abortion. I think it's quite a big week. So my book about Christians in politics, which argues, I hope very strongly, that there are good reasons to not be involved in these mainstream parties, reasons of conscience and practical reasons as well. I feel like events are backing me up at the moment. And we've got John Mason in his situation as well. I feel like events are backing me up. And, well, let's see how things develop over the weeks to come. Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. In politics, I wouldn't present it. You see that Murdo and Kate are very keen to present their opposition to same-sex marriage as a religious belief, because then they think people can't challenge that because that's like a protected characteristic. You can't discriminate against someone because of their religion. Whereas in politics, as I said, I don't want to be doing that. I want to be explaining why it's wisdom, why it makes sense, why it works. I want to be presenting that positive case, which I think is very, very important there. Right, 2 minutes to go. I've got a few more things here to look at. Have I shown all the videos? No. Yes, I have. Right, got a few more slides though. I'll just look at these very quickly. This is total fertility rates in Scandinavian countries. And basically, like most countries in the world, they've got a problem with low fertility rates. And basically that the societal structure is going to creak or collapse in decades to come. It's a fundamental, critical problem facing many nations, including Britain, including Scotland. So the Nordic countries, their strategy basically was to provide more and more childcare. The idea is, if you can have a kid, then hand it over to the state, and the state looks after it all the time. And both parents can go out to work. Then surely people will have more kids then, won't they? Well, they sort of did up until about 2010, but then see what happens. It goes down and down and down. Now, people are looking at this. Experts are looking at this and saying what this demonstrates is that your, childcare policies, etc., they can give a bit of a boost to fertility, but what wins out in the end is culture, and the culture in the Scandinavian countries is basically hostile to parenthood. It doesn't celebrate parenthood; it celebrates independence and career, etc. So people are marrying later and later, having less children. The fertility rate is going down. That's showing there that in the orange highlighter there. That's the Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, and that's having them rated by their, childcare policies, and they're right up there at the top. So some people are looking at this and they're basically in despair because that was their strategy, was to provide more and more childcare, provide it before school, after school, in the holidays, make it cheaper, start it with younger kids. They're thinking, the more we do that, the more people have kids. It's like assuming the people considering having children, they're thinking, we'd really like to have kids so we can hand them over to the state for 10 hours a day and hardly ever see them. If we could just get that service from the state, we'd go ahead and have 6 kids. Well, turns out it doesn't work out like that. Now, that's a collection of headlines just from around the world. And the general feeling among analysts in this area is that different governments have tried different things, and basically they don't work. I mean, in some countries, they pretty well pay people to have kids. There'll be various grants and loans and incentives in various forms, and they don't seem to be working particularly. I mean, in Hungary is the classic case of pro-family policy, where a lot of the emphasis is on enabling, a parent to be with the kids rather than just enabling them to not be with the kids. Hungary's policies have made a difference, and they have boosted the fertility rate, but not massively, not enough. It's still quite a bit below replacement. So I think there's quite a bit of despair there that whatever people are throwing at it is not working. And the conclusion that's been reached by some academics is that it's a cultural issue. And you've just got to regain a culture of celebrating and valuing parenthood. Because the message, like look at China, etc., the message for a long time has been that having kids can even be a bit selfish, bit of a waste of your life. It might inhibit your career, inhibit your freedom. You won't be able to go on such good holidays, etc., etc. Focusing on the bad side of parenthood. So it seems like in a society, if you have a few decades of that, it will push the fertility rate down, and then it seems like getting it back up again, dear oh dear, is extremely difficult. But the culture is the various thing, and Scottish Family Party policy recognizes that and says promoting and celebrating parenthood and family life is a really important part of what we would endeavor to do. We already endeavor to do it. That's what we would do with representation and power as well. As it says, it's a very pressing issue. And I think the last thing to mention on this is the one thing that does increase fertility rates or correlates very strongly with higher fertility rates is religious attendance, not just religious identity, religious worship, attendance, engagement, commitment, whatever. So the more religious people basically tend to have more children. I think the reason for that, I don't think it's entirely straightforward. I mean, at my church, I would say people, they tend to have there's a lot of kids there. So I'd say that bears it out. But it's not because every now and again, the preacher says, come on, you lot, get and have another kid. So it's something in the ethos that produces this higher fertility rate. People talking about, a sense of ultimate purpose, a sense of seeing family life and parenthood as part of a calling, part of a vocation, part of a, God's will or whatever. So this doesn't just apply to Christians. This applies to other religions as well around the world, where people are more religious, there tend to be more children. So in the future, is it going to be that the Earth population is going to become more religious through this sort of natural selection process? Now, you could say it's already happening. It's already been happening for quite a while. I mean, there's huge population in Africa. Fertility rates are going down in Africa, but they're still very high. And religious attendance is also very high in Africa. So the correlation is strong. So what should a government do about it? So if a government recognizes that low fertility rate is a critical threat to the nation, an absolutely critical, severe threat to the nation, and you also know that increased religiosity, religious attendance, whatever, helps with the situation, and it might even be one of the few things that actually seems to make a difference, then what should the government do in that situation? Well, I take a lot of persuading before I say, the government should be like actively encouraging religious participation, but at the very least, the government should definitely not be discouraging it in any way, shape, or form. And it's also interesting when we look at the access of religious leaders, teachers, whatever, within schools as well. I think you could make a case, a positive case, that it's good for children to engage with religious traditions in school as well. I mean, the current trend is, it's very secularist. People, would turn their nose up at religion. That's something at the fringe. The real mainstream of life is about, it's about the experts and the politicians, etc. So there's an interesting question there that I think is going to be coming to the fore in the decades to come. So maybe the family party can review our policy on that and have a rethink in some ways. Because if low fertility rate is a critical problem, if religious engagement, religious belief seems to be a way of dealing with it, then what policies could be put in place? Open question. I don't know the answer to that, but we can maybe think about that in the future. I think that might be. No, it's not the last slide. If you're in the Kilmarnock area, Friday next week, I'm involved in a question time event at St Kentigern's Church. Kevin McKenna's there, the journalist from the Herald, a few other people. I've been to a similar event organised by the same minister of the Church of Scotland. It was really good last time. There were a lot of people there as well. So do come along. It'd be great to see some friendly faces and ask some questions as well in Kilmarnock, a Friday at the end of next week. Is that the last slide? No. The SNP is having to pay the price for overspending, borrowing, giving pay rises left, right, and centre, priding themselves on the way that they've capitulated to unions and given various groups of workers huge pay rises. But reality is biting. In a sense, it's sort of a relief that reality is biting for the SNP. They'll always blame someone else. They'll blame Westminster. They'll blame Labour. Labour will blame the Conservatives. I mean, it's all ridiculous. But all three of the parties are gross overspenders. The Conservatives were gross overspenders when they were in government. Labour would have been even worse and will be even worse. And the SNP as well would be even worse. So I think there's going to be tough decisions. I think some people will be impacted very negatively by it. But on the other hand, I feel that reality has got to bite sometime. And I think that's probably a good thing. If it's like a reality check for Scottish politics, it'd be a reality check for UK politics as well. Because I think for years, governments have just presented manifestos where they've said, we're going to spend more on this and more on this. So if you ask a government representative, what are you doing about such and such a thing? The most natural response in the world was for them to say, we've spent £63 million on that in the last month, and we're committed to spending 17 more million by Christmas. That's just a standard response. But that's got to change, because the money just isn't there. They can't keep doing that. So in some ways, I think it's going to be a chastening and refining experience for the UK and the Scottish government. And is that the last one? We are done. Right. Thanks very much for spending this hour in discussion there. Thanks for the comments. There's what we're watching now. I know a lot of more people watch later on as well. Don't forget the conference, 9th of November. Do get your tickets. And I'm going to make a video about Murdo Fraser's statements tomorrow. If you haven't watched the video about the SNP conference, then when this is over, I think it's about 15 minutes long. I would recommend you go and watch it. You'll find it very interesting. Some of the things said from that stage were quite remarkable. So do have a watch of that if you can. Right. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Good night.